Silkworm crop failure due to infectious diseases is often the result of careless rearing under unhygienic conditions. Silkworms are delicate and can fall prey to a host of infections. To protect them from this onslaught, the maintenance of hygiene is absolutely vital at every stage in rearing. First and foremost, the rearing house and all rearing appliances must be thoroughly disinfected before and during rearing. Surface disinfection of silkworm seed too is of vital importance. The rearer himself must also vigilantly maintain personal hygiene. He should not enter the rearing house without appropriate disinfection of hands and feet. Before entry, hands must be washed thoroughly, first with soap and then with 1% high-grade bleaching powder solution. Feet too must be disinfected by stepping onto a footmat containing 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime. Do not neglect the regular cleaning of the rearing room floor either. It should be wiped and disinfected every day after bed cleaning with 2% bleaching powder solution. Never rear silkworms directly in the rearing tray. Make sure to line the tray with paper first. Rear silkworms on it and change the paper at the start of every instar. Bed cleaning must never be done by hand. Use only nets of an appropriate mesh size to remove refuse. The refuse must not be dropped on the floor. Collect it carefully in a special litter basket or vinyl sheet and dispose it in a litter pit far away from both the rearing house and the mulberry garden. The bed refuse should not be used directly as manure. Instead, thoroughly convert it into compost before use as manure. After bed cleaning, the cleaning nets should not be reused without disinfection. Disinfect them thoroughly in a 2% formalin solution after every use. All other equipment used repeatedly, feathers, chopsticks, etc., must also be disinfected after every use. Paper should never be reused. Destroy after one use by burning. Worms should not be fed directly after bed cleaning. Before the feed, wash and disinfect your hands using 1% bleaching powder solution. When feeding the silkworms, ensure against overfeeding. Overfeeding increases bed refuse, which alters the microclimate in the bed and makes the silkworms more susceptible to disease. Do not neglect the periodic disinfection of the silkworm rearing bed with Resham Keet Aushad. Use it strictly as per schedule in the required quantity. If diseased or dead larvae are detected in the rearing bed, do not pick them out by hand. Always use chopsticks or forceps for the purpose. Do not throw or drop the diseased or dead larvae on the rearing room floor. Instead, collect them in a vat containing 2% high-grade bleaching powder solution or 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime. Destroy by burning or burying. When, at close of rearing, silkworms are ready for spinning, mountages must be disinfected using 2% formalin solution before use. When reared under such hygienic conditions, silkworms remain healthy. Their cocoons too are well built and contain a higher silk percentage. In effect, silkworm rearing is rendered rewarding and even more profitable. Silkworm rearing houses are an essential and fundamental component of mulberry cocoon production. Silkworm health and vitality depends largely on it. So does productivity, and therefore the silkworm's requirements of feed, climate and space need to be carefully considered while planning and constructing a rearing house. Since silkworms need fresh mulberry leaves in large quantities, when choosing a site for the rearing house, ensure close proximity to the mulberry garden. Avoid low-lying areas as they can get waterlogged. There should be no factories in the vicinity, as toxic fumes and waste can imperil larval health. In hotter regions, the chosen site should be moderately covered by shade trees, as these help maintain the required temperature within the rearing house. In cooler places, opt for a dry, sunny area. When planning the rearing house, the various activities involved in silkworm rearing need to be carefully considered. Separate rooms are essential for leaf preservation, chalky rearing, and late-age rearing. This demarcation reduces the risk of contamination and crop failure. A 5 to 6 foot wide veranda around the rearing rooms aids ventilation. Anterooms outside the rearing rooms trap pests like the oozy fly and help prevent their entry into the rearing bed. The size of the rearing house would depend on the quantity of layings to be reared. Generally, every 100 DFLs require an area of 200 square feet. The shape and orientation of the house is important too. Ideally, it should be rectangular, with the long side facing the north-south direction. Doors and windows should be placed on these walls, as this orientation helps minimize heat radiation. The width or smaller side should not measure more than 15 to 18 feet. When constructing the house, measures for management of climate and disease and pest control need to be carefully considered. The outer walls of the rearing house should be thick. A rat trap bond wall is ideal as it helps insulation and is also 25% cheaper than conventional walls. Sufficient doors and windows should be provided. Air inlets and ventilators too are important. They should be placed at the base and top of the two long walls. This facilitates free and adequate aeration. All openings should be designed to allow airtight sealing during disinfection. They should also be covered by wire mesh to keep insects away. Doors should be ideally fitted with springs or other automatic closing devices to help avoid oozy fly entry. A 1 meter square sunken tray at the door is also desirable for placing disinfectant mats. The floor of the house should be raised to a height of 1.5 to 2 feet from ground level. It should be cemented and finished perfectly without any crevices or cracks, as these serve as a perfect breeding ground for parasites. The roof should be at least 10 feet high. It should be made of a poor conducting material. A thatched or country tiled roof is ideal. On the inside of the rearing room, a false ceiling suspended from the roof is desirable as it provides protection against radiation of heat or cold and shields the silkworms from sudden temperature fluctuations. A rearing house planned and constructed as per recommendations amply meets the feed, climate and space requirements of silkworms and contributes substantially to healthy, disease-free silkworm growth. This, in turn, results in better cocoon yields, improved cocoon quality, and higher profitability for the rearer. The silkworm, Bombyx mori, is susceptible to various diseases during its growth. These diseases, mainly grassery, pebrine, muscadine and flatchery, are fatal, and their prevention and control is vital for a successful cocoon crop. Bed disinfectants help inactivate disease-causing pathogens that may have been introduced into the rearing bed through diseased or dead worms. The commonly used bed disinfectants are Resham Keet Aushad, formalin chaff, Indofil M45 and Kaptan. Resham Keet Aushad or RKO is a popular product recommended by CSRTI Mysore for dual protection against both grassery and muscadine. During storage, RKO packets must be kept airtight, away from eatables and children. When using the disinfectant, the user must keep his eyes, nose and mouth protected. For use, the powder should be taken onto a thin muslin cloth and dusted over silkworms. RKO dusting is required 5 times during each rearing, once after each molt, and then finally during the final instar, after bed cleaning. The worms should be fed only 30 minutes after dusting. For every 100 DFLs, a total of 3,260 grams of RKO will be required. This can be split into 5 doses and dusted on the silkworms. Formalin chaff is another bed disinfectant that helps prevent muscadine. The strength of the formalin solution to be used for the preparation of formalin chaff depends on larval age. The concentration required is 0.4% during the first 2 instars, 0.5% in the third, 0.6% in the fourth, and 0.8% in the fifth. To prepare the chaff, mix the formalin solution of the required strength with burnt paddy husk in a 1:10 proportion. Use immediately after preparation. For use, sprinkle the chaff over the silkworm body immediately after every molt and after bed cleaning during the final instar. After application, cover the rearing tray with paraffin paper or newspaper. For maximum effect, remove the paper cover half an hour after application. The worms can then be fed. This bed disinfectant should be applied 6 to 7 times during rearing. First, before brushing of newly hatched larvae, once after each molt, and then finally during the final instar. An alternate method for the prevention of white muscadine is bed disinfection with Indofil M45 or Kaptan mixture. These are common fungicides used at a concentration of 1% during the first 3 instars and 2% during the last 2 instars. They are used in combination with levigated China clay or kaolin. The quantity required per square foot depends on larval age. This dusting is required 6 times during rearing. First, before brushing, once after each molt, and lastly on the 4th day of the 5th instar. While bed disinfection is essential for the healthy growth of silkworms, it is important to use bed disinfectants with care. They must never be applied on worms before or during molt. They must be dusted uniformly, and worms should be fed only half an hour after application. Used with care, bed disinfectants help prevent infections and eventually aid in the rearing of healthy silkworms. The mulberry silkworm is a domesticated insect susceptible to various diseases and pests. Many of these diseases and pests affect the silkworm's physiological activities and threaten its very existence. The pathogens extruded from infected silkworm into the rearing environment help in the spread of disease. Since this can cause grave losses to silkworm rearers, it is important to prevent the prevalence and spread of these diseases. Disinfection is a means of destroying disease-causing pathogens. It can be accomplished by various methods, both physical and chemical. A combination of both methods is most effective. Prior to the start of rearing, the rearing room, its surroundings, and all appliances must be cleaned, washed, and disinfected, as young-age silkworms are delicate and susceptible to diseases. Cleaning and disinfection measures must be undertaken 6 to 8 days prior to brushing. For cleaning, diseased worms or leftover litter in the rearing room and on rearing appliances must be collected and destroyed by burning or burying. Next, expose rearing appliances to bright sunlight for 10 to 12 hours to disinfect the surface of the appliances. This measure must be supplemented with chemical cleaning. The commonly used chemical disinfectants in the sericulture industry are formalin, bleaching powder, and slaked lime powder. Formalin is an aqueous solution of formaldehyde gas. It has a very strong killing effect on silkworm pathogens. Slaked lime solution is effective against viruses. Bleaching powder, another common disinfectant, contains chlorine, which has a strong germicidal effect on pathogens. The chemical disinfection of appliances should be done with either bleaching powder or formalin. To disinfect with bleaching powder solution, choose fresh ISI-marked bleaching powder with a chlorine content of 30% or above. Use a 5% solution for effective disinfection. To make 20 liters of this solution, add water to 1 kilogram of bleaching powder and make a paste. Add enough water to make 20 liters of solution. This solution can be prepared in a disinfection tank into which all appliances can be dipped for 10 minutes and then dried in shade. Alternately, using the same 5% bleaching powder solution, appliances can be given a drenching spray and then dried in shade. If the use of formalin is preferred for disinfection of appliances, prepare a 2% formalin solution by mixing 1 part of commercial formalin to 17 parts of water. Ensure that the formalin used is of good quality with 36% formaldehyde. This solution too can be used for dipping or drench spraying of rearing appliances. After spraying, Appliances must be kept covered with a vinyl sheet for 30 minutes. Cow dung smearing of rearing trays should be discontinued. With the rearing appliances, the rearing room, incubation room, leaf preservation room and mountage room should also be cleaned and disinfected. The quantity of disinfectant required depends upon the total floor area that needs to be disinfected. 2.5 liters of disinfectant will be required for every square meter of floor area. Once the required quantity of disinfectant is estimated and prepared, disinfection can begin. First, the rearing room, incubation chamber, leaf storage room and mountage room must be cleaned and washed with 5% bleaching powder solution. In a mud floor rearing room, a sprinkling of 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime is preferred. After broadcasting the mixture, sprinkle water over it. Next, a spray disinfection will be required. For this, the disinfectant must be selected with care, depending on the type of rearing house. Formalin is effective only in a closed type of rearing house. For an open type of rearing house that combines dwelling spaces too, bleaching powder solution is recommended. If bleaching powder solution is to be used for disinfection, all doors, windows and ventilators must be closed. If formalin solution is to be used, the rooms should be made airtight by covering even small gaps and crevices with paper. For maximum effect, the chosen disinfectant must be mixed with 0.05% detergent and filtered before use. Spraying should be done with force. Preferably, use a mask, raincoat, hand gloves and shoes for protection. Pay special attention to dark areas like corners and crevices. In a closed type of rearing house, spraying may be followed by fumigation with formalin. Since this is effective only under highly humid conditions, water may be sprayed in the room prior to fumigation. For fumigation, dilute 36% formalin in a 1:1 ratio with water. Heat over a small flame before use. After disinfection and fumigation, the rearing room must be kept closed for at least 1 day. Meanwhile, the areas surrounding the rearing house must be disinfected by sprinkling 10% high-grade bleaching powder in slaked lime. For every square meter, 200 grams of powder will be required. At least 1 to 2 meters of area around the rearing room must be covered. The disinfected rearing room must be opened just one silkworm seed or larvae procurement. Though disinfected rearing rooms and appliances considerably reduce the risk of pathogens, repeated disinfection of the rearing room floor, rearing seat and appliances is a must, even during rearing. First, at the start of rearing, seeds received from seed production centers should be surface disinfected by dipping them in 2% formalin solution for 10 minutes. The egg sheets can then be dried in shade and later arranged for incubation. During rearing, the rearing room floor must be wiped every day after bed cleaning with 2% bleaching powder solution. To make this, 20 grams of high-grade bleaching powder with a 30% chlorine content must be mixed in a liter of water. At weekly intervals, the surrounding areas too must be sprinkled with 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime. Rearing beds, which are a source of pathogen contamination, also need periodic disinfection with Reshamkit Aushad, formalin chaff, Indofil M45 or Kaptan. The rearer too must ensure hygiene through disinfection. Hands must be washed with soap and then with 1% high-grade bleaching powder solution. Feet must be cleaned on a 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime powder mat before entry into the rearing room. Articles of everyday use must be disinfected with 2% bleaching powder solution after every use. Nets, foam pads and feathers should be disinfected with 2% formalin. Silkworm must be cleaned with nets and the litter collected in litter baskets or polythene bags. It should be carefully disposed of in litter pits, far away from the rearing house and mulberry garden. Diseased or dead worms must be identified and promptly picked. They should be collected in vats containing 10% bleaching powder in slaked lime and burned or buried in soil. When rearing is completed, cleaning and disinfection is required once again. The room and all appliances should be screened for dead worms, litter, and other waste material. These should be collected and buried. Appliances and the rearing room itself should be disinfected. The importance of disinfection and disinfection methods cannot be overstressed, as it is this that checks disease and allows the rearing of healthy silkworms and eventually the fruitful harvest of quality cocoons.